BioProst. It's a regenerative medicine company with patented and proprietary technology which revolutionizes total hip replacement. Our presenter today is James Weiss, founder and president of BioProst.
I'd like to thank the ACS for inviting me to present today, and I'd like to thank my fellow presenters. I am a practicing orthopedic surgeon in the Washington, D.C. area, and I'd like you to take a moment and consider the following clinical scenario. Over the past several years, you've had increasing pain in your hip. It has now become unbearable. You can no longer function on a daily basis. You can't sleep, you can't walk. You've tried medicines, therapy, all modalities. None of these relieve your symptoms. Prior to the onset of your hip pain, you were a vigorous and active person. You worked out every day, you participated in sports, you ran every day, and intrinsic to your physical and mental wellness was your ability to work out every day and run. You no longer can do those activities. You've sought several opinions from expert orthopedic surgeons. They've looked at your x-rays, they've examined you, they all give you the same answer. You have end-stage hip arthritis and you need a hip replacement. The good news is that you can get pain relief with the standard hip replacement. The bad news is that the standard hip replacement technology will not allow you ever to run again or participate in sports. And I am pleased to present to you BioProst Incorporated. We are a regenerative medicine company, and our goal and our mission is to change the conversation that that patient has with their surgeon and to improve the story that a patient who is young and active and who needs hip replacement has. Let's take a look at the target market. 1.4 million hip replacements are done worldwide. Annual sales about $6 billion. About 300,000 hip replacements are done in the United States. And if you look at the demographic, 25% of those are now done in patients who are under 55, and 50% are done in patients who are under 65. And that demographic changed about 2 to 3 years ago. 65-year-old patients and older were typical hip replacements. Marketplace is projected by several studies to increase over the next 15 years by 174%. And the charge per case in Maryland is about $24,000, and in the US it's about $35,000. Revisions are a big problem. There are about 50,000 hip revisions done annually in the United States with an average cost of about $54,000. So what are the problems with current hip replacements? It's a great operation. It's been done for years. It's provided dramatic pain relief. Problem is, it's an open procedure with extensive soft tissue dissection. Infections are a big problem, which I'll go into later, about 0.5 to 3%. Dislocations, that's about 5% perioperatively, and that is a risk that never goes away and increases about 1% per year. Blood clots, all patients have to be on blood thinners afterwards and can account for complications as high as 5% from blood thinners. Leg length discrepancies, patients don't like their legs being a different length, but that is part of the operation when you're providing stability. It's traditionally an inpatient-based hospital procedure. Blood loss varies by surgeon and approach, and blood transfusions increase your risk and, of course, cost. Let's take a look at revision hip replacements. Revisions are expected to rise to 66,000 cases over the next 5 years with a cost of about $1.62 billion. If you look at the complications from infection, this is about 3 times more expensive than a primary surgeon. If you look at revisions, they're projected to increase about 20 to 30% for every year for the next 3 decades. So that number gets very large quickly. Infected hip replacements are a costly complication with a hospital readmission, and you can see that's about 300% more than for a primary procedure, and also a penalty for the hospital for a readmission. So let's take a look at BioProst's solution to the current issues with a regular hip replacement. So the BioProst procedure is a minimally invasive procedure. There's no opening of the joint capsule. There's no taking down of muscles or ligaments. It's an outpatient procedure. It can be done in a hospital outpatient, or it can be done in a surgery center with a dramatic cost savings to the payers. You can expect complete rehabilitation, which, as I mentioned, you could not with a standard hip replacement, that is not built for. If you are regenerating your own hip, you could participate in full unrestricted activity, include sports. No dislocations would be possible postoperatively because the hip capsule is not open. Anticoagulation would be very limited, if any. Infection rates would parallel a hip arthroscopy, which is far less than 0.5%. is a platform technology which can be applied for other types and all types of synovial joint replacements, including knees, ankles, and shoulders. And a key point here, revision surgery. If this were to wear out, all hip replacements ultimately wear out. If this procedure wore out, since no bone is sacrificed, it would be similar to an index procedure, and you saw the 300% difference in the costs. This is the BioProst team at this point, myself and Chief Operating Officer and Head of Clinical Development. This is a group of advisors as surgeons and industry people who are helping us develop the prosthesis. Let's take a look at some milestones. Prototyping and biologics. Initially, we'd be looking at a small animal study to combine the novel scaffolding materials into biologic. The prototyping of the device would be for a large animal study. We would be fabricating the structural component and review the manufacturing issues involved in that. Mechanical testing for the structural integrity of the implant and its degradation over time once it's implanted. We'd be optimizing the biologics and the delivery system for time-dependent release. Preclinical development. Over here, choosing an animal study, goat versus sheep, both of those are acceptable to the FDA, and we would be partnering with the veterinarian for implanting the device. Clinical, we would be identifying sites for a pilot study once the FDA approves us, and we would be engaging a CRO for monitoring data. Here's the current stage of development. This is based upon 2 issued US patents. We've also filed provisional patents which reflect several things. 1, updates in the technology in the device, modifications to the surgical procedure, and these really focus around the improvements in biomaterials which have come online since the original patents were issued. Regulatory strategy, there's 2 separate components. There's the device, which is really an implantable delivery system for the scaffolding and the biologics, so it will be combined. And there are precedent products which exist in both areas which have previously been approved. Key success metrics. So reimbursement issues, always an issue with the device. These could be done under existing hip replacement codes, and since it's a modified hip arthroscopy, these codes could be stacked and combined, beneficial to the surgeon since these would result in increased reimbursement. Present reimbursement for high demand hip prosthesis by most insurance companies is about $5,000 to $6,000. So this would be a revenue point for the company. Initial market projection is 10% of addressable US market, which would be 150,000 hips in patients under 65, young active patients, depending on how you define young. And within 3 years of a market approval, we would expect to reach this number. We would expect an increase in uptake about 1% to 3% per year, depending on surgeon adoption and training, which is always key. This is a standard conventional hip replacement. You see, this is a large bore metal implant. This requires an osteotomy and wiring. Like as you heard in earlier presentations, anything that is mechanical, including hip replacements, ultimately wears out. This is metal, this is plastic, this will wear out and generate debris. Let me go into the BioProst tissue engineered hip replacement. This is done through a small pilot hole. This is a minimally invasive procedure. This is a scaffolding material which is exceptionally strong, and this is mated to a different scaffolding material. The device is implanted. The scaffolding material and cytokines are mixed at the time of surgery. This is all done arthroscopically and minimally invasive through a small drilled pilot hole. The scaffolding is then delivered, and then this is a structural scaffolding which supports the injectable scaffolding. This injectable scaffolding is then injected and delivered into the device, and then this is done in several steps, which would not be 100% clear unless you look at the patent and the provisional patents. This then ultimately is populated by the local mesenchymal stem cells. The pink becomes bone, the blue becomes ultimately absorbs and disappeared, and you're left with a hip replacement. And you're only left with bone. There is no device left. It is totally bioabsorbable. This is the original issued patent. The revenue model, we expect a revenue stream after 5 years. We expect to be profitable in 5 to 7 years. This is a longer ramp because it's a longer regulatory pathway, but it is offset by the exceptionally large future US and worldwide market and the ability to do other joints with platform technology. Financial projections, we expect a margin typically of 50 to 80% based upon in-house and contract manufacturing. We expect to break even in about 3 to 5 years. We can have additional revenue through licensing agreements with the veterinary market, as the veterinary market does do joint replacements in companion animals, and all of the large orthopedic companies have veterinary market implants. We could also do an outside U.S. rollout with CE marking, and that's an additional source of revenue. And as I mentioned, large companion annual market is secondary, but would be an early royalty. Exit strategy, we are in discussions with major medical device company regarding co-development of core technology. Co-development involves use of proprietary biomaterials that are compatible with our delivery system. Partnering arrangement could result in joint distribution of product packaging with shared revenue returns. The product packaging would deliver a total hip replacement solution, and BioProst could either then be acquired or go on to refine its technology for other joints. Investments, we're seeking $2 million to do our proof of concept studies, develop the prototype, implant studies, large animal studies, and working with the lab valuation. We are extremely early, and that would be placed dependent on our early discussions with investors about what the terms would be. Thank you.
All right, questions? In the back?
I thought this was very exciting. I was kind of question out of curiosity in terms of the calcification or bone formation. Since you already have existing bone that's already there, this is two questions. For the bone that's remaining, are you sure it's going to be strong enough to support the new bone that will grow? Is there a possibility that the new bone is going to be stronger? Granted, this is a degraded hip bone.
So the part of what you didn't see, because the whole patent is that the first part of the procedure utilizes the patents cover a surgical procedure and the device both. The surgical procedure allows you to remove the degenerated hip joint through very small incisions, which is not possible with any other technology. And then, so you actually remove the arthritic hip through these very small pilot holes, arthroscopically and fluoroscopically guided, and then you put the implant in. The device is many times stronger than is needed for the forces, which have been documented many times over many studies across the hip joint. And then as the new bone is formed, the device initially is load-bearing. It is then load-sharing and then disappears as the bone and cartilage construct becomes strong enough to support the body weight. So the new bone is your own bone and would be equally strong with the bone you had before you developed hip arthritis.
So my follow-on question to that is, and I'm just basing this question off of the kind of diagram or picture that you had depicting the process. So in the picture, I think you were only showing the replacement of bone for the femoral head on the hip, and the rest of the structure was left. I assume that was the original bone.
So if we could go back, let's see, a couple pictures here.
Yeah,
okay, so
yeah.
This actually replaces both sides of the joint. This is the femoral head,
Right.
but if you look at the purple here, this also replaces the acetabulum. Now that is not always necessary in both in patients like a hip fracture patient who had a good acetabulum. You would just replace the femoral head, so that this actually replaces the acetabulum, and this is done in multiple steps, and then replaces the femoral head. So you're replacing both sides of the joint.
Right, and so how are you going to ensure that this new bone, which develops within the purple device that you...
Yeah, the pink is the bone.
How do you know that's going to actually properly bind to the remaining hip bone?
Yes,
there?
so if you look at the interface here, this is the cut edge of the bone, and so this, we just made it pink so that you would recognize that this was a result of the scaffolding. So the way that the stem cells, the local mesenchymal stem cells population populate the scaffolding, and that has been shown by a proof of concept study, which has been published in The Lancet, is that this goes creeping substitution. So the bone actually forms across this interface, so it would be a continuum. The scaffolding material here functions as a piece of essentially structural rebar to offset the shear forces that would exist across this until the mesenchymal stem cells and bone populates this and is strong enough.
Other questions? John? DJ?
So I think I'm loud enough, people can probably hear me. So there must be a lot of, sort of special sauce in the biologics that you're injecting. I'm assuming bone morphogenic proteins, other trophic factors. And you're asking for something extremely complex to occur. So what is the predicate for regeneration of bone? Is it spinal fusions? And are there current existing products that do to some extent what you're proposing to do here?
Yes, there are. So, so the formation of bone is easy. Anybody knows how to form bone. It's done in non-unions. It's done in fractures. There's 30 products that I can grab out of the operating room that can form bone at any time. There's actually only one cytokine, which is in the TGF family, which you actually need to grow cartilage. Growing bone, you can use dexamethasone, which has been on the market for 40 years. That grows bone reproducibly in all forms of animal studies, higher and lower animal studies. The only factor that you need, which is a TGF, that has been shown to grow cartilage. That has already been through the FDA in a different study and has been shown to be safe. And we are also in discussions with a existing company which is able to do the same thing with a biomimetic peptide. So it down modulates the FDA regulatory pathway versus using a cytokine.
Since I'm a CPA and since this is a conference not only about the technology but also about raising money, and I'm very active in the world of tax incentives and tax credits. You're located in Maryland, and at least one other is located in Maryland, and there is a biotech tax credit in Maryland which says that an investor could get back 50% of their investment, whether they're from Maryland or any other place in the country or around the world. So I think that it's another really excellent way to help get financing through encouraging investors. I'd be glad to talk to you more about that.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions?
Yeah, I could just ask a quick one. So, I wasn't clear as to the regulatory part that you're going to need to follow for this. I mean, were you suggesting it was a 510K, or is this?
I would love to suggest it's a 510K. From your ears to the FDA. So, from your mouth to the FDA's ears. So, the standard first blush at this is a combined product. So this is going to go through cyber.
Yeah.
However, there's some wiggle room there. Of course, Margaret Hamburg just left, but she has put into place a couple of, I think, forward-looking programs. First in human innovation pathway. However, for us, we would go through and have available likely as a humanitarian device exemption. I didn't talk about this, but there is a subpopulation of patients, under 1,000 patients a year. They're in their teenagers or in their 20s. They develop hip arthritis through a number of known mechanisms: trauma, idiopathic chondrolysis, slip capital femoral epiphysis, avascular necrosis. Those patients have no present reasonable answer in the orthopedic and pediatric community as to what to do for those patients. Some of them get hip fusions, which is disabling. Unfortunately, some of them in their 20s end up getting hip resurfacing procedures, which ultimately they go out and destroy because they finally have some relief of their hip pain, and it's hard to talk a 22-year-old into not going out and running. So we believe that an opportunity for humanitarian device exemption would exist in this subpopulation of patients because there is no reasonable answer. We burn no bridges with this procedure because we're making bone, we don't remove bone. And so all we have to provide is safety, which we can prove. And if this ultimately did not work and failed, those patients would then get the treatment that they would have gotten anyway. Once we can prove that we can do that in that population, we can then go on to other pilot studies and pivotal studies.
Michael?
So have you guys decided to do anything excuse me, with a niche veterinary business? I mean, people will pay anything to have their animals happy again.
Yeah. So I can tell you that unlike for humans, people for large companion animals will spend any amount of money.
Yep, that's.
And I, just as a personal story, my sister's dog has had, neurosurgical operations, and the neurosurgeon got paid 5 times more than I've gotten paid when I do a spine operation, and it's all cash. And
We
so,
see that in Rancho Santa Fe all the time.
yeah, so the large animal companion study owners have no budget ceiling, and they will pay cash for this, and presently do. And all of the large orthopedic manufacturers have a veterinary division for German Shepherds and Beagles, which get congenital hip dislocations, which of course, humans get as well. And these patients, they pay $10,000, $25,000 cash. They don't think a thing of it. And that's approximately an $800 million to $1 billion market that we would have immediate access to, because once we do our large animal study, we've done a large animal study, and then we can license it or get an early liquidity event or royalty for investors who want an early exit.
Reading my mind.
The other follow-up question is resources.
I'm sorry?
Resources.
Yes, yeah, it could be done in any large animal. Those, unfortunately, those animals are now put down. We would be able to address those.
Other questions? Okay, all right.
Thank you.